How many people here have seen Dead Poets Society? Okay, good, excellent. Okay, many of you, great. So for those who haven't, or for who it's been a while, Dead Poets Society was a movie that came out in 1989, starring Robin Williams as an unconventional young English teacher who arrives for his first year of service at this very buttoned-down all-boys college prep school in New England. Very, very proper institution. It's 1959. The intellectual atmosphere at the school is deeply repressive, reflecting the supposed conformist spirit of the times. And the Robin Williams character identifies that these boys all have very closed-up inner lives, and he wants to connect them using poetry to their inner world. He wants to use the power of poetry to open them up. So in one very memorable scene, he quotes the poet Walt Whitman from A Song of the Self. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. And he has each of these very proper young men take their turn, standing on their desk and sounding their barbaric yawp over the roof of the world as a means of self-expression and self-assertion. And of course, the whole movie is about them learning then to break free of these expectations and live authentic lives. Now, by the time Dead Poets Society was in theaters, which again was 1989, while it may have had some poignant things to say about the struggles of adolescence, which are universal, it was already a little bit of a dead letter in terms of cultural criticism. Right? 1959 was a long time ago, and the country had already gone through the radicalism of the 60s, and the Me movement of the 70s, and the greed is good years of the 1980s. By 1989, America had already become a sound your barbaric yawp kind of culture, in theory, if not always in practice. And we, Unitarian Universalists, have always been, even more than the general bent of mainstream culture, a sound your barbaric yawp kind of people, right? Walt Whitman is right in the back of the gray hymnal. We read from him all of the time. In Song of the Open Road, he says, afoot and light-hearted, I take to the open road. However sweet these laid-up stores, however convenient this dwelling, we cannot remain here. We will sail pathless and wild seas onwards. That is the song of the self in the Unitarian Universalist Church. We've used that reading here. Or consider the words of the poet Mary Oliver, which are also often repeated in this place. The world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you, harsh and exciting, whoever you are, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? These are the kinds of values that Unitarian Universalists tend to lionize: adventure, assertion, exploration, independence, questioning, the quest for the new and the exciting. And these are the sermons that it is fun to write and deliver, right? I love these because I'm a UU, and I love these values as well. And I find these sentiments invigorating and exciting. But consider instead our reading today by Marge Piercy called Seven of Pentacles. Under a sky the color of pea soup, she is looking at her work growing away there. Actively, thickly, like grapevines or pole beans, as things grow in the real world, slowly enough. If you tend to them properly, if you mulch, if you water, if you provide birds that eat insects a home and winter food, if the sun shines and you pick off caterpillars, if the praying mantis comes and the ladybugs and the bees, then the plants flourish, but at their own internal clock. So there's a different virtue on display here, being held up for our attention by the poet Marge Piercy. It is not exciting seeming as those virtues that compel us to hit the open road, to sound our barbaric yawp, to cross over the horizon and make our mark on the world. The virtue in question that is being held up is the virtue of faithfulness. The virtue of faithfulness. And 50% of the time, this is the virtue of just showing up. And 40% of the time, this is the virtue of just keep doing what you were already doing. And then maybe 10% of the time, it is the virtue of just sticking around. Sometimes even when you'd rather not, sometimes even when other people are leaving. Almost all of the time, this is what faithfulness requires of us. Show up, stick around, keep doing what you're doing. It is, as I joke in my sermon title, the most boring virtue. But it is also an indispensable virtue for those who seek to, as the poet says, weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses. Faithfulness as such requires no special insights or abilities to live out. Show up, stick around, keep doing what you're doing. It's not sexy. In a culture that celebrates the heroic assertion of the individual will, faithfulness can almost seem like a negative, like a lack of daring or self-assertiveness. In a culture that prizes novelty, faithfulness can seem unoriginal. Much of the time when you are being faithful, you are not blazing new trails. You are carefully laying down bricks along an existing path, one at a time, so that future travelers may also find that same path and may trust that it will be there for them when they need it. And of course, new trails need to be blazed, but also roads need to be maintained. Believe me, I live in Indianapolis. Ask us Marion County folk about the potholes. Faithful people are the lifeblood of every institution that seeks to sustain itself over time. For example, church life, like most parts of life, is mostly comprised of 1,000 mundane, mostly invisible tasks. There's a great deal of background activity required just to sustain the community at all times. And then every special project, every fresh, bold new vision carries with it its own laundry list of mundane tasks. And while we probably know who authored the bold vision, we may not hear about all the people who made the phone calls, who updated the spreadsheets, who wrote the checks, baked the casseroles, washed the dishes, cleaned the bathrooms, ferried the kids around, wrote the press release, designed the flyer, which required a job description, ran the background checks, updated the website, etc., etc., etc. This is faithful work, indispensable work, too often unglamorous and unacknowledged work. This reality is one of the reasons that this church, like most, discourages targeted giving, targeted financial contributions to the church budget. Because if everyone got to decide exactly how their money was going to be spent in the life of the church, you'd have a church with truly brilliant programming and no roof, power, or toilet paper. Because buying the toilet paper is not exciting, but you definitely notice if it doesn't happen. Now, just because faithfulness is simple, it doesn't mean that it is easy. Far from it. Faithfulness requires constant choice over time. It is the path of sustained commitment. It is the path of clarity about priorities. As such, faithfulness as a virtue is the too often unacknowledged precondition of creation. Faithfulness is the precondition of creation. When we think of virtues that characterize artists, for example, we often use words like brilliant, uncompromising, visionary, expressive, and so on. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the number one virtue required of artists is faithfulness. Specifically, faithfulness to the craft. Because if that isn't there, forget about it. Think about all of the hours spent practicing, spent mentally rehearsing, spent drafting, revising, discarding, practicing some more. This is the faithful precursor to the creative act. And then there is the faithfulness to the creative process itself, which often means hours of tedium, self-doubt, and frustration to get to those precious moments of actual creation. Now, I don't have a pretense at creating art, but I do spend a lot of time writing, which means I spend even more time not writing. Just staring at that white space on the computer that is staring back at me, maybe mocking me a little bit, refusing to be filled. And if one is not able to be faithful through those painful and frustrating hours of not writing, one never gets to the moment where actual words land on the page. But the truth is, all of it is writing. All of it is writing. So faithfulness is our commitment to the entire life of the creative project. The parts that are easy, the parts that are frustrating, the parts that are tedious, and the parts that are transcendent and thrilling. We need faithfulness to create in our lives individually, and faithfulness to co-create religious community together. Indeed, it is faithfulness that transforms religious community from a gathering of individuals into a covenanted community. A community that is characterized by covenantal as opposed to consumerist relationships. So covenantal versus consumerist. What do I mean by that? Think about a marriage or any committed long-term life relationship. Marriage is a covenantal relationship, not a consumerist relationship. In a consumerist relationship, the whole point is to get my needs met. Consumerist relationships are transactional. I give you X, Y, and Z. Maybe it's money, maybe it's time, maybe it's attention, whatever it is. And I get back something that meets my needs. And as soon as my needs are not being met, your needs are not being met, the relationship ends because it doesn't make sense anymore. And plenty of relationships in life are very appropriately transactional. In a covenantal relationship, however, there is an underlying commitment to something larger than the needs of each individual participant. And all of the parties involved are loyal or invested in this larger reality. Moreover, covenantal relationships are not transactional. They are co-creative. They are a partnership. And whereas a transactional relationship is usually time-bound, it's usually understood that it's going to come to a natural end, covenantal relationships point to the future. We expect them to endure. And this language is drawing on the book When Moses Meets Aaron by Gil Rendell and Susan Beaumont. Thus, a marriage is not like I put in X and you give me Y. A marriage is something that the parties are creating together to be sustained over time. And there's an understanding that if all of my needs are being met at this instant, there's a trust and there's a commitment to the larger value that underlies the relationship. And that's faithfulness. Now, it must be said, and I don't want to be at all misunderstood on this point, that faithfulness is not an invitation to self-destruction. It does not mean the acceptance of abuse. Right? Some relationships need to be ended. Some causes, some people, some families, and some institutions are not worthy of our trust, our loyalty, our time, or our tears. Some situations need to be walked away from. So if you are being mistreated or abused in body or spirit, then what our religion says to you is that you are worthy of love, that you are worthy of safety and support and care. And the appropriate action is for you to care for yourself. Faithfulness does not mean putting up with abuse. Now, UU religious communities are also intended to be founded on covenantal relationships, not transactional relationships. There's a set of higher values, our principles, which underlies the relationship, which we all share an interest in, which we are all committed to. This community intends to endure over time. Indeed, a key purpose of the religious institution is precisely to carry our values into the future, to safeguard their blessing for the next generation to inherit. This institution is a vehicle by which present dreams become future reality, and we safeguard this institution for those who come after. And so we are all building the church, this religious community, together. In the process, of course, we do reap many individual benefits. Over the long haul, we are fed by the garden that we are planting. But not every year will have a brilliant harvest. Sometimes the crops will fail. Some winters will be harder than others and longer than others. There will be seasons of drought. There may even be, God forbid, the occasional swarm of locusts. Sometimes, honestly, the other gardeners may plant a bunch of crops that we're not that interested in. And if we get late to the table, there may not be anything there that is really pleases our palate. And then there is the choice to walk away or to trust that the soil is fundamentally good, that our compatriots are just as loving of the land as we are, and we keep working together for the next harvest. Every religion has its shadow side, the things that it does well and the things that it does less well. And Unitarian Universalist communities are no different. We have included perhaps more than our fair share of brilliant seekers, of iconoclasts, of free thinkers, of edge pushers, of audacious crusaders. Historically, we have been a barbaric yawp kind of people, and that has been one of our brilliant contributions to the history of this country. Our shadow side is that as a community, we have not always been the most faithful of people. Now, our whole covenantal way of doing religion should actually call us into faithfulness. We are, after all, a religion of freely chosen commitments. We are here because we choose to be here. But that same chosenness means that in practice, sometimes we live as consumers of our own religious community. We sort of skirt on the surface of relationships rather than plunging into the depths that are only made possible by real commitment, by faithfulness. And the reason that this matters to me, and the reason I wanted to bring it up, is because I believe that Unitarian Universalism has something to offer the world that the world badly needs. And I don't say this in a conceited way, like with a savior complex. I'm not saying that we are the only ones who have what the world needs. I'm just saying that we have something that the world needs. What we have to offer matters. The 20th century Unitarian minister James Luther Adams said, "People come to church seeking intimacy and ultimacy." Intimacy meaning we want to know and to be known, including with ourselves. We want church to be a place where we can be vulnerable to one another and vulnerable to those parts of ourself with which perhaps we need to be in deeper relationship. We want church to be a place where we can come into clarity, where we can connect or reconnect with the stirrings of our own soul, and where we can name these stirrings to our fellows with honesty. This is intimacy. But we also seek ultimacy, which is a desire to connect to something that is larger than ourselves. Something which transcends this thought, this impulse, this body, this moment. We want to be a part of something sustaining and enduring and beautiful. And one of the functions of a UU church, I should say the UU way of being religious, one of the functions of Unitarian Universalism is to help each person connect intimacy to ultimacy. Not just identify that which is intimate and that which is ultimate, but to bring them into real relationship, to connect the two. Because when intimacy and ultimacy are connected, then that which is most real and raw and urgent and vital inside of ourselves is put into service of that which we most call beloved outside of ourselves. And this is a beautiful thing. Now, in our increasingly decentralized, disconnected, post-truth world, in a world of rising inhumanity, of isolation and anxiety, we offer an antidote to cynicism, to prejudice, and to fear. A community of kindness and courage that seeks out the best in each person and connects it, mind and heart, to a larger vision of a world transformed by love and freedom. The world today needs what we have to offer, but if we are to collectively offer it, I believe that one thing that Unitarian Universalism needs from us, more than it has in the past, more than our brilliance, more than our barbaric yawp, is our faithfulness. Because we face a very uncertain future. Right? Our culture, our society, its institutions are changing at a dizzying pace. That includes the church. The religious landscape is constantly shifting and changing under our feet. Our known and comfortable ways of operating may not serve us well in the future. So we are entering a time when I believe there's going to be a lot of improvisation and experimentation as we figure out what it means to be a UU community in the 21st century. And what will be needed during this period more than ever to bring our gifts to the world will be faithfulness. Our ability to be in deep, faithful relationship to one another, so that we can hang together through turbulent times. We can trust the larger vision when we may not know exactly what we're doing at this present moment. So we can forgive ourselves our inevitable mistakes along the way, and so we can stay clear in our commitment to love one another and love the world. Reach out, says the poet. Reach out, keep reaching out, keep bringing in. This is how we are going to live for a long time, but not always. For every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes. May it be so.